Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. So we have a Gemini full moon that happened today, December 15th at 4:02 Eastern Time. So that was 9:02 Greenwich Mean Time, or Universal Time. I'm recording this about 4 in the afternoon. So we have the moon in Gemini and we have the sun in Sagittarius. One of the things that I want to do in this video is sort of ask the question, what happens when you look at a chart and you kind of are stumped and don't really know what to say about it? And that was happening with me. I see the grand trine and I see this other unofficial triangle pattern with these two green lines. I'm going to actually just expand this so we see it. There we go. So here's this grand trine, these yellow lines, yellow dotted lines, and then there's this green, or this other triangle with these two green lines, and this triangle, this trine, yellow line here, indicating a trine. So there are two intersecting triangles, and I think that's really interesting. So what we have, and I guess I'm gonna do this before I talk about what do you do when you can't figure out how to read a chart. Like nothing's coming through for you. So here we have this, the way that I think of grand trines are these patterns that are just running. They were already started up and they're just kind of running as an undercurrent, and they're kind of they're determining things, like things in our lives are just happening and we're acting in certain ways just because this pattern is in effect. So it's sort of an unconscious habits, you could say, or unconscious gifts and talents, you could say that too. And the question is, we always want to make our habits and our gifts and talents conscious if they're not working for us. So, for example, we learn how to drive a car. We have to be really conscious when we're learning, but eventually we learn it well enough, we can just do it. But if we're doing it in a way that's actually not good and maybe makes us prone to getting into accidents, we might want to go back and really pay attention and make that process conscious. So the grand trine in and of itself doesn't do that. It just flows. But you see here there's this other triangle pattern and it's intersecting with the grand trine at its base. On one side over here, the north node, that's our evolutionary trajectory. And the other side here, this is Mars. And so it's intersecting at these 2 points. These green lines, and Mars is the action principle, the assertion principle, the identity principle, the I am principle. And it's retrograde. It turned retrograde on December 6th, but it started its shadow period on October 24th, and it stationed retrograde on it stationed, meaning it appeared to stop and be still in the sky on December 2nd. So from December 2nd to December 6th, it was stopped in the sky. From our perspective on Earth, it looked like it was stopped in the sky. It wasn't really stopped, and it isn't right now really going backwards, but that's what it looks like from our perspective on Earth. So Mars is retrograde right now. And interestingly, from December 2nd to December 6th, when it was stationed, that's when that murder of the United Health CEO happened, when Mars was preparing to go retrograde. And that station point, though, when the planet a retrograding planet is either in its station about to turn retrograde or in its station about to turn direct, those can be very potent times. So that happened on December 4th, so right in the middle of this of Mars's station, and now of course it's going retrograde. So I don't generally like to focus a lot on outer events, but it is just interesting when you're trying to make sense of retrogrades and trying to learn. You can notice what is happening either in your own personal life and or in outer events. And this was such a striking event that it might be, in terms of learning about Mars retrograde, at least this particular rendition of it, it might be worth seeing if that story kind of keeps coming back at certain periods, significant points in the Mars retrograde cycle. So that's just something I wanted to mention. But intersecting this grand trine, if we go back to this idea of the grand trine and the habits and the patterns, and something else needs to come into play to bring that pattern into our consciousness. And that's what these green lines are serving. These are square type of aspects. So this one is actually a square between the sun and the north node. So that is a challenge. And this is a waning square. And so it aligns here, if we count it out on the natural wheel, with the beginning of Capricorn, this idea of winter, this idea of going through a scarce period of scarcity and the need to exercise mastery, or if we haven't already, the need to develop mastery to get through this period. And if we haven't developed it, if we don't know how to do this, and we of course can learn as we go, but there may be things we have to look back to see what we didn't learn that we need to know and need to develop to be able to get through this scarce period. So that process, if we get to Capricorn, and I'm just thinking symbolically of Capricorn, if we get to this sort of scarcity period in the seasonal time of year, it's winter, and we don't have what we need, and we realize we didn't know we needed that, then that is very much a consciousness kind of generating thing. It puts us into crisis, and that forces us to sort of start looking at something. It brings something to the surface we weren't aware of, and then that gives us an opportunity to start paying attention and start asking questions like what's missing, and how do I provide that for myself? How do I develop that sort of thing? Anyway, this other green line is to me the more interesting line. This is a sesquiquadrate, or a sesquisquare, meaning a square and a half. So it's 90 degrees plus 45 degrees, which is 135 degrees. And if we count 135 degrees out on the wheel, it gets us here at 15 degrees of Leo. And this is a waxing sesquiquadrate by the way that I determine aspects. So as a general rule, you determine aspects by determining which planet is the slower planet, or meaning which planet takes longer to make a circle around the chart. And then that becomes the anchor planet. And then you count from that anchor planet to the other planet. And that allows you to see, is this a waxing or a waning aspect? And you can see here, when we start with Mars, we can already see that this is a waxing aspect, because if we look at the opposition point here, this sun has not reached the opposition point yet. So it's still in its waxing phase. The opposition point represents the full phase. So it hasn't reached the full phase yet. So it's still waxing. In evolutionary astrology, the way that I learned how to calculate aspects when the sun is involved is to make the sun always the anchor planet. And the reasoning behind that, as I understand it, is because in the sky, all the planets revolve around the sun. And so the sun is by default the anchor planet. But my personal reasoning is that in the chart, while that is true in the sky, in the chart, it doesn't work like that. In the chart, we're at the center, and we are looking out at the sky as, and seeing what we see from the perspective of Earth. And in that perspective, the sun is traveling around in the chart along with all the other planets. And so I just base aspects by the orbital period of the sun from our perspective, and that's 1 year. And Mars moves more slowly than that. So for me, this is a waxing sesquiquadrate, but you can play around with it and see what interpretations you come up with, and what makes more sense and you resonate more with. I resonate more with this one. So anyway, getting back to this, so 135 degrees falls here at 15 degrees of Leo. And that is the beginning of the gibbous phase. These lines here represent the start of phases, and I don't include the names because it just doesn't look good to, so I apologize for that. But this is the new phase, this is the crescent phase, this is the first quarter phase, this is the gibbous phase, this is the full phase, and this is the disseminating phase, this is the last quarter phase, and finally this is the balsamic phase. And this is not something that as far as I know, this isn't a standard technique or practice in astrology. It's something that I've done. I took the idea of phases, which is about looking at aspects and determining what phase they're in, and I just decided to sort of abstract those and wrap them around the wheel. So that's something that I pay attention to. So at 15 degrees of Leo, this is a midpoint of Leo, this begins the gibbous phase, and the gibbous phase is Virgoan in nature. So even though it's beginning in 15 degrees of Leo, there's kind of in this second half of Leo, there's kind of this Virgoan quality to it. So and the way that I think about this whole thing, notice that at each fixed sign, at 15 degrees of each fixed sign, there is a phase shift. So 15 degrees of Taurus, 15 degrees of Leo, 15 degrees of Scorpio, and 15 degrees of Aquarius. So I see it, so this is also the midpoint of the quadrant. Those 15 degrees of fixed signs on the natural wheel is a midpoint of the quadrants. So I think of it as like this wave pattern in the quadrant that's building up to a peak point and then subsiding away from the peak point. So in the first half of a fixed sign, and I usually think of Taurus as sort of the archetypal way of thinking about this, the energies, in the cardinal sign that begins every quadrant, it's like trying to start a car, right? It's like you just keep turning the engine. What you're trying to do is turn it over, and eventually it's turned over, and then that carries into the energy that's been initiated, carries into, in this case, Taurus, the fixed sign. And the job of the fixed sign is to take that energy and stabilize it and ground it and concentrate it and crystallize, well, actually I'll say and ground it and concentrate it so that it can reach its fullest potential, so that it doesn't fall, it doesn't fall away before it's reached its potential. So the fixed signs are really important. And then it reaches its peak, and I would say this is a crystallization point, and then it falls away. And in the second half of the fixed signs, as I am thinking about them, and this is all experimental, this is more about stabilizing so that what we learn through this process and what peaked here, we can integrate that experience. So that's how I kind of think about it. So this sesquiquadrate aligns with 15 degrees of Leo, so this idea of the crystallization point. And I'm just going to hold off here while these sirens go by. So 15 degrees, so this idea of here, what we have is this initiation of nurturing and nourishment and feeding and caring, and that gets initiated, and then it kind of takes off in Leo. That gives us a foundation, the energy we need. Leo takes it and like integrates it into self-expression and just naturally starts, sorry about the noise out there, naturally starts to express itself. It takes this emotion and it begins to express itself and to create from that emotional grounding. And then it reaches a peak point. And at this peak point, this crystallization point may be an awareness of, it's great to have raw potential. It's great to have raw creativity. It's great to, just be me. But if I don't learn the art and skill and craft of this me, this energy, this gift, this potential, this light that is in me, then I'm just going to squander it. We are given gifts and talents and vitality and light and all of that, and that there's a certain innate raw potential there. But we can take that raw potential higher to a next level if we learn the art and skills and practices. And that's what this Virgo and gibbous phase energy is about. So in my view, again, this is just the way I'm thinking about it. In the second half of Leo, we start to be like, oh, okay, we sort of are like, okay, now how do I see what I have, I see what my gift is, I see this wonderful expression, but how do I sustain this? And how do I learn, and again, just learn the gifts and talents? The first fixed sign is Taurus, and that is our gifts and talents. So we can also see a sort of a cycle where this gifts and talents is carried into the next fixed sign, which is Leo, where we are expressing those gifts and talents. But then the second, Taurus is also an earth sign. It then evolves into Virgo, and it's like, okay, we need to learn the skills and practices. We have been blessed with these gifts and talents, and now it's up to us to decide what to do with those. So this sesquiquadrate, this waxing sesquiquadrate, is intersecting with this grand trine. And so it may be that there's this awareness that's starting to come about, wait a minute, I have this raw potential. And we could say the Grand Trine is also kind of about this, but it's untapped raw potential, or raw potential that's just playing out. But it's up to us to take that raw potential and develop it. And so this sesquiquadrate intersecting with it, that seems to be what this is about. It's like, okay, so there's something already at play, something already there. How can I take it to the next level? And maybe there'll be a crisis point or a challenge point that makes that clear to us. On my other Substack, I wrote an article. My last article I wrote was an awareness that I had about nourishing myself, and the need and the challenges that I've had with that, and the need to get square with that. If I want to actually go further in life, so I don't know how else to say it. Like to actually develop, there are all these things I want to do, but if I don't get my nourishment right, and that nourishment is Cancer, which comes before Leo, then I can't really do those. But anyway, I recommend reading that article if you want a personal example of this whole coming of age theme that I talked about in the new moon, for the new moon chart. The moment started to arise for me when Mars was in its retrograde period. The other reason I'm tending to focus on this sesquiquadrate energy is because there's this bundle of sesquiquadrates right here, these three sesquiquadrates between Pluto and Ceres. Ceres being about caring and nurturing ourselves, and the moon, once again, caring and nurturing for ourselves, and also Jupiter in our beliefs. And in my case, I was really resentful that I was expected to grow up and be a mother and housewife. And so I didn't learn how to nourish myself. I didn't learn, the basic skills of, how to care for myself and my body and all that. So Jupiter retrograde beliefs, sort of reconsidering our old beliefs and becoming curious about them, asking questions about them. So that's sort of the crux of the chart as I see it. And I was, as I said at the beginning, I was actually struggling to kind of make sense of this chart. Oh, and by the way, there is another sesquiquadrate here that's intersecting. I didn't even really think about this, but it's intersecting with the third point. So we have a square intersecting with the north node point, and then we have a sesquiquadrate here intersecting with this point, which is a point that Mercury is holding down, and that is sesquiquadrate Chiron, and this is a waning sesquiquadrate. The waning sesquiquadrate, if we count 135 degrees backwards along the wheel, that falls at 15 degrees of Scorpio. This is about choices, about commitment. What are we making? In my case, I made choices to blow off learning how to care for myself because I had an idea about what that meant. But the commitment, we really want to make a commitment to ourselves and to those we're in relationship with. So we want to be conscious and aware about the intentions, our commitments. We want to identify our intentions, and we want to make commitments to those. And it may be that our commitments have been unconscious, and that we haven't really been clear-headed about, clear-minded about our commitments. Then maybe they've just been maybe the expectations, that sort of thing. And so this sesquiquadrate with Mercury ruling Virgo, and Mercury ruling Gemini and Virgo. So this idea about being curious, and Mercury also represents our body. We can't do anything in this life without our bodies, and our bodies are like the cars. We want to treat them really, really well. The better we treat them, the more we can enjoy life, Leo, and the further we can go, and perhaps the higher we can go. It's in Sagittarius, so we can talk about the higher we can go also. And this sesquiquadrate has to do with this wound, this Chiron, which has been such a big player in these charts. So the wounded healer having to do with identity, assertion, I am. And so perhaps the idea that we have been expected to conform, just as a general rule, that's sort of gotten us out of touch with ourselves and sort of biased us to sort of behave or you choose these things over these other things, when these other things might be actually better for us individually and perhaps just better generally. So that's kind of the idea. And Chiron is retrograde and Mars is retrograde. They're trine one another, so they're forming the base of this triangle, this grand trine. And so Mars is retrograde, Chiron is retrograde. This idea that we are in a reflection period, thinking about these wounds, thinking about what's been stopping us, thinking about what needs to be healed, all that kind of stuff. And these kind of challenge points perhaps arising to help us to the extent that they arrive, they bring more clarity, and we can make better decisions and choices around our commitments and our intentions. So that's what I see in this chart. But as I said, so going back, as I said, I was struggling a little bit to make sense of this chart. So what I did was I've been in the process of creating these databases that allow me to just sort of get an overview of the charts through looking at the hemispheres. So this is the East and West hemisphere. This is super interesting. We can see all of this in the chart. We can see that there's more going on in the eastern or left part of the chart than in the right part of the chart. But I find it easier to really notice it and see what's happening when you look at it like in a form like this. So we have 10 planets and objects, or planets, objects, asteroids, centaurs. I include everything. I think technically I think you're not really supposed to include the nodes or like the asteroids and that sort of thing, but I include everything. So including everything, we have 10 objects, we could say, 10 planetary objects or points in the eastern hemisphere, or the left side of the chart. And that's the agentive side of the chart, the side where we just have an idea about something or an impulse about something or whatever, and we just act on it. We're not considering other people, and we're not held down by other people. We're just acting on it. In the Western hemisphere, there's only 4 points, so there's a dominance. There's more of this agentive energy. And the Western hemisphere is receptive, so it's more about I act in cooperation with you. We don't just act by ourselves, but we understand the kind of the context we're in and the people we're in relationship with, and we work in that way. What's interesting about all these planets in the agentive side is because for me it wasn't feeling like there was a lot of I wasn't feeling the energy was like taking a lot of action in a way, at least not out in the world. And Mars is retrograde, which is interesting. But if you notice here, if we look at the modalities, there's a little bit of cardinality. Cardinality would jive with the agentive kind of energy. It's initiating, it's catalyzing. But there's more fixed immutable energy in this chart. So the fixed energy, this to me, so if we look at the quadrants, we have on the natural wheel, every quadrant starts with a cardinal sign, which is initiating or catalyzing, and then it moves to a fixed sign, which is sustaining, maintaining. I like to think of concentrating and crystallizing. And then there is a mutable sign. Every quadrant ends with a mutable sign. And the mutable sign is about changeability and transitioning. If you think about the seasons, the season begins at the vernal equinox, and that's the Aries time of year. And so that's things are just being kind of set into motion, and then we get to Taurus, and all the flowers are budding, and the bees and the birds are all very busy and all that kind of stuff. And then we go into this transitional period. And we also go into like the dog days of, so for example, the dog days of summer here. So the energy has reached its peak and it's sort of sustaining before it falls away into the end of the season, making way for the next season to begin. So this is spring. So here would be the dog days of summer. Sorry if that was confusing. So this would be summer. This is in the northern hemisphere. This is spring. This is summer. This is fall, and this is winter. So that's the idea of the quadrants. There's a seasonal kind of flow to them. So So when we look at the fixed and mutable signs, they really have, the fixed sign has to do with what's already been started. And the mutable sign is about kind of transitioning. It's looking forward to the next, the thing that's coming next. It's sort of unwinding from what was brought to a fruition, and then starting to make a transition to what's coming next. And I think of this, like, I think of the second half of the fixed signs as integrating and embodying. We might think of this as, in addition to change and change and integrative, we might think of it, change and transitioning, we might think about it also as clarifying, especially when you consider that the final mutable sign is Pisces, and that's clarifying. So even though there's all this agentive energy, it's really about the past. It's about our action has something to do with the past. And I would say it has something to do with this idea of a wound and starting to become aware of something, habits and patterns we have been running that we haven't been aware of, that have been preventing us from mastering something, preventing us from really being able to rise to our highest potential, something like that. And I didn't understand that. It really took to looking at this chart and thinking about it, that I was able to see this. So this is really helpful. And then we can just look at by element, and there wasn't really much here. So we have air. We already actually saw this. Well, I didn't look at it explicitly, but there's a lot of air. There's 6 air signs, and then there's 5 fire signs. Those are the dominant ones. So that's very active energy. There's a good thing that there's this sesquiquadrate and this square in all of these sesquiquadrates, because this is going to be, fire and air together would be very ungrounding. It tends to rise up. And we want to make sure that we're grounding our energy. So how do we ensure grounding just generally in life? Well, we show up day after day after day, and we do the work that's there to do. We learn the skills. So we can be inspired, yet we can also remain grounded. That's kind of the idea. And so maybe that's something we're having to learn. The idea of broomstick came. So learning to ride our broomsticks, right? So the idea in that scene in Harry Potter where the kids are just learning, they've gotten their broomsticks and they're trying to figure out how to fly them, and they're just falling all over the place. Like, you actually have to learn how to ride your broomstick, and then it can take you places. So with regards to our gifts and talents, our light and our vitality, we have to learn them, and then until we do, we'll keep falling over. But once we learn them, they can take us, they can take us places. So it's kind of that idea. So anyway, so that's something that you can do if you're having trouble trying to make sense of a chart. You can kind of break it down and be like, how does, and see if anything really stands out for you. For me, the East-West Hemisphere breakdown, it's just taking a minute to load, really helped me make sense of it. Anyway, thank you for listening to this. I hope there was something useful and helpful for you. And remember, I'm sharing my perspective, the way that I see things. Other astrologers will see things differently, and all the perspectives are really, if this perspective that I'm sharing isn't resonating, then there's probably one out there that does. Every perspective, I think, is valid and worthy. It's just a matter of we're all sort of bringing our own experiences and perspectives and the particular ways we've learned astrology to our readings. So anyway, I will leave it there. Thank you so much for watching, and take good care. Okay, bye.